talk about some of the biggest stories this week from the legal world. It's friend of the show, Andrew Eborn.
I love that bill, the friend of the show. It's going to be good. And what a week it's been. We've had all sorts of things. Winnie the Pooh turned into a horror movie. We've had all sorts of exciting stuff, lots of new laws coming in. But I wanted to look at the Ryan Giggs case, because the jury was dismissed on Wednesday, and the reason is they couldn't reach a verdict. And I thought we should look into why that might happen.
Yes.
So what happens on a general principle is that in criminal cases, they ideally want a unanimous decision, where there are 12 men and women of good, true nature deciding the fate of somebody. They want a unanimous decision. If that cannot be reached, what it says is after about 2 hours, it tends to be 2 hours, 10 minutes allowed backwards and forwards to the court, you can have what's called a majority decision. But that majority decision can either be 10-2, it sounds like a score, doesn't it, for our good friends in the football world, or it can be, if there's less than 12 jurors, as there was in this case, then you can have, there are only 11 because somebody became sick, you can have 10-1. What happened? They didn't reach the majority decision. So, and what the judge tries to say, look, if I gave you a bit more time, would you be able to come to a decision? And it turned out it was unrealistic that they would. So therefore, the jury has been dismissed. What that means is that the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, have 7 days to decide should there be a retrial. And that effectively is going to come up on the 7th of September, next Wednesday, to determine whether he has to go back into court to face it all again. Ryan, obviously, it should be said, is obviously denying all of the charges, and therefore those sort of factors will be taken into consideration when people are looking at it.
So the CPS have to decide whether or not there's a realistic prospect of a conviction, is that?
Well, what they do, they will reassess. They'll normally go for a retrial. They would look at what the sort of evidence that may have come out during the trial, what are the reasons they may not have been able to reach a decision, take into account the views of the judge, of the victims, or alleged victims in that sort of case. That's what normally happens for a retrial. And they will then determine whether it goes ahead or not. What's really interesting, though, is other aspects, because Gary Neville is also splashed all over the newspapers at the moment about a potential contempt of court. And what this was to do with was his Instagram. He's got 1.5 million, almost as many as you two, 1.5 million followers on Instagram. And he made a post, which I won't repeat here, but in case the same thing could happen, but he made a post during the Ryan Giggs trial, which he said had nothing to do with Ryan at all. It's to do with the Glazers and that sort of stuff. But that has been referred to the Attorney General to see whether or not be contempt of court. And it's a warning for anybody commenting on cases which are ongoing, because you cannot say whether you think somebody's innocent or guilty. You cannot take photos in court and so on and so forth. And the punishment for contempt of court is up to 2 years in prison and also a fine. I mean, the fine for people who are very wealthy is not that much, but it's a fine. But 2 years in prison, so it's very, very serious. And the reason for that is, could it prejudice what would otherwise be a fair trial?
Because the judge, I understand it, was even thinking about ending the trial when Gary Neville's Instagram.
They did discuss it. They discussed it, because that's normally what's going to happen, is if it's been so prejudiced, if the jurors might have been influenced by what's happened, could it affect that? And they discussed it with the prosecution, they discussed it with the defence, and they took, I think it was about 50 minutes out to discuss this particular post, and they decided, no, it's OK, we can carry on with the trial. But because of how high-profile Gary Neville is, it has been referred to the Attorney General. So all of that will come out in the next few days, and we'll cover it here as well.
The question that everybody's got on you can see the people at home, they're going to be on the edge of their seats with the popcorn.
Yes.
What they want to know is, can we have a national celebration? Is Gary Neville going to go to prison?
You can't possibly comment.
Don't say anything. Don't tweet. Don't pass a comment. Ignore him. But this just goes to show that so many people are so used to tweeting, and I say massive amount of followers there, not really thinking, but this is a big issue. You might not have thought about it beforehand, or maybe you had, but didn't know what the consequences were. So I thought this case has sort of rumbled on and sort of leached into lots of different areas, hasn't it?
You're absolutely right, Esther. And what's going to happen, it's a warning to everybody out there, because we've had defamation cases from Agatha Christie about social media. We've got criminal cases now with Instagram. Be careful what you say. The crazy thing is, just on principle, is that if there is a retrial, what Judge Hilary Manley said, it will not be until the earliest, the 5th of June next year.
Gosh.
And we've got all the backlogs and everything else, so the witnesses have to do the whole thing again. Ryan will have to be put through it all again if there is a retrial. So it's a big, big impact.
I always say that the two things you don't want to go before a judge for are perverting the course of justice and contempt of court. I mean, you can commit as many burglaries as you like and you've got very little chance of being sent to prison. But perverting the course of justice and contempt of court, they very much frown upon.
Can I tell you, he gets all the freedom of information on all these subjects. He absolutely does. He's absolute anorak on this.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure to see you both.